Good evening. Welcome to Wine and Words. I am Sarah Jane Rose, narrator and wine consultant, here to bring you my two worlds together in perfect balance with wine and words. We are in the midst of Mystery March, where we have been looking at the mystery genre, including thrillers, true crime, YA and amateur detective. And for each week, I pair a wine which has a tenuous link to crime and mystery. Last week, we looked at Burgundy and the most famous episode of Wine Fraud, and we had the lovely Paul L. Arvidsson come on to talk about his YA thriller and amateur detective, The Wheels of Cady Gray. This week, we are moving over to Argentina, where we're going to be talking about a very sad case of wine poisoning. And we are going to be tasting a wine of two parts, the Bonarda Malbec. And coincidentally, that is paired with a book of two parts, and that is Split Decision by Carmen Capuano, who is joining me in just a few minutes. But first of all, we're going to have a chat about Argentinian wine. Now, if you've got any questions, then do pop them in the comments and we will get to them if we can. And if you've read the book, let us know. If you've got the wine, let us know. If you're drinking something else, let us know what you're drinking. So Argentina. Now, in the UK, we're a little bit obsessed with Argentinian Malbec, and specifically Mendoza Argentinian Malbec. And it's a bit sad in many ways because that's not all Argentina has to offer. Argentina is obviously a vast area that grows a huge amount of grape varieties, but we've become obsessed with just one of them. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the area and the other things that you can find in Argentina. So let's look at the area. So similar to Burgundy last week, where we were talking about somewhere that appears to be really complex, but actually you can break it down quite simply. And Argentina, no problem at all. So when you talk about the area itself, very simply, you're talking about North Argentina, the middle of Argentina, and South Argentina. And those are the sort of areas that you're going to refer to. The north of Argentina is known for its high altitude wines. Now, that's a phrase that is bandied around quite a lot at the moment. It's quite trendy. I'll probably do a post about that separately, but that area there, the north, is where you're going to get those high altitude wines, and the soil there is this sort of sandy loam soil. The areas there are, and for those of you with a better knowledge of Spanish than me, you'll be crying into your wine, but the regions there are Catamarca, Huye, Salta, and Tucumán, and that's where you're going to get a variety of grape varieties. They include Cabernet, Malbec, Bonarda, and some of the white wines, the Torrontés. Then in the middle, you're looking at Huye, which is more of a sort of desert area, and this is where you find Mendoza, La Rioja, not to be confused with Rioja in Spain, and also you'll find San Juan. And this is where you're going to find your big Malbecs and that sort of area there. Then down in the south, where the climate's a little bit cooler, you're looking for things like the Pinot Noir that comes from there, which is really superb. So there's lots of different things, but you can also get Shiraz and Sauvignon, and there's a huge amount of wine to be had from Argentina that it's not just about Malbec. And the other thing to consider is that although it's considered in many ways a new world wine, it is in fact got a sort of very rich history going on there. And when we talked about Burgundy last week, we talked about the sort of the terroir of the area. And Argentinians, again, are very behind their terroir. They have this sort of very unique area that also, luckily for them, doesn't really suffer from things like pests and mold and mildew. And so they don't have to use a lot of pesticides and intervention in the vineyard, which means you get a lot of really good organic wines that are worth investigating. Another thing about Argentina that people don't necessarily think about when they're just sort of going for their Argentinian Malbecs is that there is a huge amount of really incredible fine wine grown there. And so at that high-end level, if you feel like treating yourself, it's worth investigating those high-level wines, because you're going to get something that actually is incredible value versus buying a very expensive Bordeaux or a very expensive Burgundy. But there's a lot of stuff in the mid-range that you can get from Argentina. It's incredibly reliable and wonderful. And what we're going to be looking at in terms of talking about the grape varieties was the Bonarda, which is the second most planted grape variety in Argentina, but we don't really know much about it. And as usual within the sort of wine industry, it's not that simple. There's always something complicated and mysterious about it. So Bonarda in Argentina is not to be confused with the grape variety of the same name in Italy, which is called Bonarda. That is not the same grape variety at all, despite the fact that they have the same name. Bonarda is actually a grape variety called Dolce Noir. So again, typical of wine stuff. And this is why people get so confused about it, because these intricate things of things that are called the same thing but are not the same thing, and things that are the same thing but they're called different things, which is really helpful. So, Sarah, what's the connection with crime for the Argentinian wine? Well, there was a case back in the 90s, sadly, of some wine poisoning where a number of people died because some lower end white Argentinian wine had the addition of methyl alcohol in order to increase its volume. And what happened was this ended up on the market, and people died from the consumption of it. But when they traced it back, the problem was it had been distributed to two different brands, and they traced it back to the original winery that produced it. Now, the owner of that winery insisted on his innocence, that it couldn't possibly have been the winery, that somebody during the distribution chain must have intervened and changed the wine at that point. So he was arrested, and then when he was set out on bail, he, still proclaiming his innocence, did a runner. And so they never proved where this methyl alcohol was actually added. But the winery was, of course, shut down. It did a huge amount of damage to the Argentinian wine market at the time. However, to take into consideration that during that period in the early 90s, there had been a lot of legislations that had been lifted in Argentina with regards to produce. So there were quite a lot of people who actually blamed the government for a lack of control over these things, and there was very little red tape on getting things to market. So that's one of the reasons why that is incredibly unlikely to happen now. So though it's a sad story of an unsolved case of poisoned wine, it's pretty unlikely to happen now. So now we're going to have a look at this Bonarda Malbec here, which is a wine of 2 parts, and have a little taste of it. And this is where I'm going to bring in Carmen, because she's got the wine as well. So we're going to have a little chat about that and see what she thinks. Hello, Carmen.
Oh, hello. Here's one I opened earlier. Yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Good. Do you drink much Malbec?
No, I don't drink much red at all, actually. I've kind of graduated up through wine. It sounds terrible, but back in the 90s that you were talking about, I was very much a German sweet wine drinker. So I used to drink all the Milks and Hock and Moselle, and then I got slightly more sophisticated, only slightly, and I kind of moved on to other whites, and then eventually more recently into roses, with the odd bottle of red, and champagne and cava and things like that. But yeah, so I've kind of dabbled in all the different flavors. But as I've got older, I found that it's the less sweet drinks that I like, bizarrely. Kind of thought I would be, going into more of a sweet tooth, but I'm actually going away from it, strangely. So it kind of appeals more now to have that depth of flavor, but without the
it's
sweetness.
Interesting how your taste buds change dramatically, don't they? And but I find, because and specifically with regards to Malbec as well, is that some of the Malbec is so high in alcohol as well that I just can't deal with it. And that's the advantage of this one, which is only 12.5. Is it 12.5 and 13? The glasses on. It's only 12.5%. So again, when you're looking at something that you want that's a little bit lighter, you want red, but you don't want something that's insanely alcoholic and insanely concentrated. You can have something that's got a bit of lightness to it. So this blend of the Bonarda I really like. So and this is this is not an expensive wine. This is a sort of £8, £9 bottle of wine. So and nice. I like, for very me, smooth. It's what? Sorry,
it's very smooth.
I like, again, the nose on that is a nice little smoky and cherries and.
There's me nodding as if I know what you're talking about. I'm a Glaswegian.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Things. It doesn't matter. It's all. As I say to everyone, it's always subjective. I don't care if you smell feet or whatever. It doesn't. It doesn't matter, because your sense of smell is very personal to you. And I do a thing often with tasting events where I get people to hold their nose and taste the wine, because you realise how much your sense of smell is involved in that whole experience. Because once you do that, you're like, that's horrible, and then you bring it back in because it's very. But I feel like your sense of smell, it can be very personal. So
yeah.
But that's the wine, which we shall carry on enjoying whilst we talk about the book, which I have here. So I chose this one because obviously we were doing Mystery March, and we did a poll actually, and people voted for a sort of psychological thriller, which this fits into. And but tell us a little bit about when you wrote it and your sort of journey with the book.
So at the time when the idea and the whole concept came to me, I'd just written or just started to write a series of 10 books, the Owner's sci-fi series. And I'd actually written the first couple of books, first two, and self-published them. I'd put them out to various publishers, and I'd got lots of feedback saying, yeah, really great, but don't know if it's quite what we're looking for at this moment in time. And then I was in the shower, which always, I'll tell people, and it always sounds strange, but I was in the shower. And this character, Natalie, actually sort of came to me, as it were, and told me her story. And it was very compelling, obviously, because of everything that happened to her. And so I started to write that. And it was just, we kind of went on this journey together. So I started off knowing kind of the overall arc of where her journey, where she started and where she ended, kind of, but not all the details. And to be honest, even the ending was sketchy. I knew I can't tell you exactly, because obviously I'd ruin it for people who are going to read it.
I know that's the difficulty with this book, actually, is talking about it and doing anything. It's like, well, I can't mention that or that.
Absolutely. But the concept of it is, it's kind of, like you said, a book in two parts. So it's alternate layers. So there are two boys in it, and Natalie has the choice of going on either of these two dates, but they are for the same evening. So she has to make this split-second decision, hence split decision. And she makes it, and she goes out on the date with her chosen partner. However, the book reads as if she's gone on the one date on the one timeline, and then, as you know, on alternate chapters, it does the other timeline. And so there's see
a bit of beginning. And I think I said this in the post very early on when I was reading it, or on Instagram when I started reading it. Once you'd got into that, the kind of tension that builds up with that, and I was like, I had to literally stop myself from going, but I want to know what's going on, because you don't get any of those answers for quite a while. Yeah. And I had to stop myself from reading ahead or anything to find out what was, because I was tempted at one point. I thought, well, maybe what I'll do is I'll read all of the chapters of this bit first and then go back. And I was like, no, that's cheating. Carmen's written it this way for a reason, so I didn't do that. But yeah, it does, the tension really does ramp up because of that, the mystery sort of element of it.
It does, but I think it's more than that. It gives you a bigger depth to the whole thing, because you kind of realize that, okay, on this date, it's all great. On this date, terrible things are happening. And the truth is that, we don't all have teens. I have teens, and we've all been teens. And these things do happen in reality. This is a very, very sad and dangerous and difficult world. Yeah. And so, what I'm doing is trying to reflect reality in it. And certainly when Natalie, as it were, appeared to me in the shower, that's very much the essence of it I got. But I think, as well as propelling the mystery forward, doing it like that, it gives a greater insight into the characters and the different ways that people react, when faced with difficult things. So it's quite a strange story. And I think if you've ever watched, if you remember Sliding Doors from 1980 something with Gwyneth Paltrow, it's that kind of same idea where, the book goes in two separate directions, and you kind of have to figure out which one's a real one, which one isn't. But as I said, I didn't even know myself. I kind of knew the overall arc very vaguely. And then it just played itself out as I wrote it.
And did you write each section and then mix them up? Or did you write them in the order that we read them?
Yeah, I pretty
certainly.
much, once it's down on the paper, down on the page, that's pretty much it for me. I mean, I write films and all sorts of things, and I do edit, but generally speaking, when I've written it, and then I go back and I change all the spelling mistakes and all the typos and
Yeah.
the duplicated words and stuff, then that's pretty much as it's downloaded from my brain. So you kind of, you get it straight out. It's like a stream. It just comes, and I just write it down basically.
And was that hard to do actually? Because as I said, as a reader, I was tempted to, skip a bit to find out and then go backwards. And so, did you find yourself when you were writing it, kind of doing, oh, I want to do, or you sort of very disciplined with it and like, no, this is this is what I've decided, and this is how I'm going to go forward with it.
Well, because it downloads, I don't really have a choice in it. But in a way, it's no different to any other book that's got multiple characters. So, for example, any book that's got more than one character will often alternate chapters, and you'll have, someday this main male character and then the female character, and and it alternates like that. Mine just alternates more because it's altering mid-chapter with one of the same main characters. So it's just a bigger version of what naturally happens anyway. But no,
that's true because you get lots of books obviously where there's a point of view that comes in at a different, and it's not quite that, it's very different for that. But yeah, so you're right, it's not doing something that breaks away completely from that, but it's just got that different, and the tension really holds it because of it. Now, and obviously there's quite a lot of one of the things when I got to a certain point in it where you were aware that things were going very wrong on this one thing, and there's those moments that, and I genuinely did go, oh God, like, because as a teenager, there were moments where I put myself in stupid situations, and like, there's a moment where she sort of gets in the car and you're going, don't get in the car. But as a teenager, you feel pressured to kind of get in that, and I think those bits for me really kind of rang true. That awful bit of being a teenager and not making sensible decisions.
Yeah, and I think she is pretty much a sensible girl, but she's in an impossible scenario, and she does, she makes the best of it, and she tries to. At each and every turn, she tries to make the right decision to kind of not dig herself any deeper. But of course, if you've ever been in one of those situations in real life, that's very difficult. And when you're trying to second guess someone who is either evil or, not on the same agenda as you, it's very difficult. So, and that is clearly what she tries to do at every step. She tries to figure out, a safe way back, basically, but it's tough.
Yeah. But and there are moments in it that deal with things that potentially let's say have sort of trigger things, and for me there were moments, and I thought, oh, this is, but I felt as a reader that it was dealt with kind of quite sensitively. There was no there wasn't too much graphic, so it was almost referred to rather than making that whole, obviously it's very traumatic, it was awful, but for me as a reader and how my sensitivity towards those sort of subjects, I found that was dealt with quite sensitively. And was that a choice that you made?
It's very difficult because you switch on the TV now and there's so much explicit sex with everything. I mean, it's very graphic, and you're trying to, as a writer, you want to portray reality. So you don't want it to be, oh, goodness, please undo my bodice. You want it to be real and current. But there's a level, you also don't want to be making the reader feel embarrassed or intimidated or titillated. That's another thing, because of the subject matter. What I didn't want was people buying the book for titillation. There's 50 Shades. There's all sorts of books out there that they can get that from. That's not what this is. And in fact, none of my books are that. There might be occasions where there's sex mentioned or violent acts or rapes or whatever, but they're always dealt with sensitively, because I think that's important, because this isn't about, I didn't want people to feel enjoyment, as it were, with reading that. That's not what I'm trying to elicit. So although I want them to enjoy the book, I want them to feel uncomfortable enough that the book kind of,
that it has, it does have an impact,
has an
but it's not,
but it's not awful. It's not stomach churning. Yeah.
No. I definitely felt that, because at that point I was like, oh, is this going to go to, and am I going to be, and it wasn't at all. I definitely felt that was. So you've talked about, my cat has just jumped onto the back of my laptop, so I'm not quite sure what's going to happen next, but we'll see. Let's talk. So you talked about some of your other work, so let's just talk briefly about how you started as a writer, and because you do quite, as you say, you write for films, you do quite a lot of different things. So give us a quick journey of Carmen as a writer.
Yeah, I never actually intended to be a writer. It was never a conscious decision or even a conscious thought, to be honest. It was the fact that I'd had a child, and I'd always worked all my life. I'd been a teacher, and I'd worked for British Gas in management, and I'd done all sorts of different things. And then suddenly, I was a mum, and I was a kind of stay-at-home mum, and terrible thing to say, but I got a bit bored. And it was a case of, I'd always used my brain, and now all I was doing was changing nappies and feeds, and we've all been there and all done it, sort of thing. And so I kind of we got to the stage with Ryan, my eldest, who's 21 now, where I'd read him everything at bedtime, and you're kind of rereading the same toddler books and the same baby books and all this, and I got a bit bored. And so I started to tell him the story that I'd made up. And somewhere, I don't actually know when, but somewhere along the line, as this story was progressing, and we got longer and longer and longer, and wasn't reaching an end, I thought, oh, this is a really long story. I probably should write this down, because I'm never going to remember it all otherwise, and I'm going to have more kids, and I'd quite like to tell them the same story. And so I wrote it down, and it became, as I was writing it down, it became this proper lengthy novel. It's a really big book, actually. It's the longest book I've ever written. It's 100 and something thousand words. It was 102,000 words, I think the first edition of it was. So it's a big book. And while I was writing that and thinking, oh, this is a long story, I thought, actually, this is more than a long story. This is 10 books. And I kind of don't know how you go from not writing at all to writing 10 books, but I did. And so I just wrote it. And I wrote, as I said, the first one, which is set in the far distant future. It's called The Owners, actually. And then I started to write the second book, which was kind of like a prequel, really, and is set more or less here and now. And then I thought, well, it'll go in baby steps back to, so it gets back to the point where book one's at. And then meanwhile, along came Natalie with her story. So I wrote that. And then I wrote another book called Ascension, which I'm about to bring back out again. Actually, I've done a second edition of that. And then a ton of other stories. And then in between all these other stories, I thought, well, I've got to keep on with The Owners. So I then wrote volume 3, volume 4, volume 5. And then kind of crazy things started to happen. So I'd been traditionally published, but I got traditionally published with Split Decision and with Ascension. And I was still keeping on the self-publishing with The Owners things. And then somehow from that, I kind of fell into writing for films and TV. And I don't even think that was a conscious choice either. It was a kind of, I had this idea, and then I thought, I think I'll write it as a film. And so I did. And I got hired by a Los Angeles film company to polish up one of their scripts. And then it just kind of, I don't know, snowballed a wee bit. Not hugely, it's not like I'm over in LA every day and everything, but, but things took off. And I was writing, I've written, more recently, I've been writing for a games company, so writing games narratives as well. And then I came back just, I think at the beginning of lockdown, and thought, right, I've really got to, now I've got this quiet period, and the films that I had lined up couldn't get made because it was lockdown, and suddenly the TV industry had all these COVID regulations that they were bringing in, and they had to have COVID supervisors, and people were getting trained up. And the one film that the one TV show that I have, which was hopefully going to get made at the time, had people coming in from abroad, and that couldn't happen. And so everything just got delayed and stopped. So I thought, okay, I'll go back to The Owners. And so I wrote books. I don't think where I'd got to. I think I'd got to, by that stage, I'd got to book 7. I've written book 6. Had I written book 6? No. So I then wrote in lockdown books 7, 8, 9, and 10 in really quick succession, as well as a ton of other films and some more books. Because
you must
it
just be
was just
writing for like 10 hours a day. It was a lot of writing.
Yeah. So if I'm writing a book, I usually write a chapter to a chapter and a half a day, as well as doing emails and admin and everything. So it takes, I'm writing all day long. And if I'm writing films, I usually write, I would never say I write a certain amount of scenes because it doesn't work like that for me. So I usually write for films between 10 and 20 pages, depending on how many other emails and admin works and polishes and other things that I've got going on. I'll write 10 to 20 pages a day. So yeah, so I'm quite prolific, but
and moving from that disciplines, moving from writing books into it's quite a different, not everybody can make that transition. That's not an easy transition. And was that something that it just sort of happened, and it wasn't, you didn't go out and go, right, I'm going on a training course to write TV scripts, I'm going la 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 la. It was just happened to be an easy transition for you?
Yeah, I think challenge, and it just kind of came naturally, to be honest, which sounds really weird, doesn't it? But I think over the years I've watched that much TV, I've kind of absorbed a whole, it's like a learning by osmosis.
I don't know how you had time to watch any television with 3 children and writing that much, but
yeah, I do. I mean, I do watch a lot of TV still. I do love TV, and I don't really have any other hobbies. So, I'm a TV watcher and I'm a writer, and that's pretty much it. But I think once it's the idea of the discipline of it. I mean, writing a script and writing a book are totally, totally different, both in the whole format of it and the way you write it and the points of view that you would use and everything, right? Everything. Because when you're writing for film, obviously it's a very visual medium, and when you're writing a book, it's not. So, book writing, you're kind of putting all the ideas into the reader's head. It doesn't leave an awful lot of room for their imagination. And in some ways it does, because if you're doing like mystery thrillers and that, you're relying on their imagination, but you still have to set the scene. Whereas in a film, there's so much, visual tapestry, there's so much color or lack of color, or, dialogue or lack of dialogue, or, background or whatever, that it's a very different way of doing it. But I just like them both, to be honest. And it's nice sometimes when I've got a bit fed up with doing a film, I'll go and do a bit more on write a book. And when I'm fed up with doing a book, I'll go and write a film, So it's nice to be able to kind of dip in and out and do the different things. I like that.
So how many books have you written now then in total?
So I've written 27 books. I've published, I had published 6, I think, or 7, but as I said, I've withdrawn a couple of them now to bring out the second editions, because I decided not to be traditionally published anymore, and I took my books back, which isn't really the done thing actually in publishing, but I decided to do that. So I've taken them back, and I'm putting them back out again under my own name. So I've written 27 books, which I will eventually manage to get them all published, but I'm just short on time at the moment. And I've probably written about 80 scripts, maybe more. So a few, but and that again, that's another thing, because I like to, sort of mix up all the genres. So sometimes I'll write romantic comedies, sometimes they're straight up comedies, sometimes they're dramas or thrillers or horror, everything.
And what's your favorite genre to write then? What is it not?
I don't know if I have a favorite genre to write. I mean, obviously, if you're writing comedy, that's kind of fun, because you can laugh.
I imagine that's really. I feel like that's really hard, because like, well, I think it's funny, but what if no one else thinks it's funny?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's called comedy on TV, and you watch it and you kind of think, well, I haven't laughed once during that, so I don't know why it's comedy. But yeah, I mean, comedy's hard to write, but the writing of it is fun, So when you think of a funny scene, or something funny happens to one. I mean, often I'm chuckling along as I'm writing, you know. So that's what's beautiful about writing funny things, about writing comedy. I mean, obviously, writing drama is lovely and it's very heartfelt and it can be very poignant. But there are moments, you know, in books like Split Decision, in Jigsaw Girl, where she self-harms, and so there's a lot of deep you know, empathy for the character when you're writing that, and it can actually bring you quite down when you're just doing that. And not long ago, just about 3-4 months ago, I finished another book. I would tell you the name of it if I could remember it, but I can't remember the name of it.
It's a closely guarded secret at the moment. Yeah.
I think it's something like Girl Displaced or something. I can't remember now. I can't remember. Anyway, and it's a very insightful book, and it's about a girl who has basically become an orphan because her mum's died, and her mum died years ago with cancer, and now her dad's more recently died, and so she's quite recently orphaned, and she has to go and live with her grandmother, and of course, her whole life's devastated, but her whole world has been changed as well because of this. You know, she's been uprooted from her home, and then there's all this other stuff going on as well. And then there's a mystery around it. So it's a mystery novel, this one. But there are moments in it where she's just kind of filled with despair. And so when you write that, once you've sat and wrote, you know, a chapter and a half, you know, when there's no despair all the way through the chapter and a half, you know, but there are moments of it that you're drained at the end of it. I mean, actually physically drained. And sometimes I feel like, and it's ridiculous. It is ridiculous to say, but you feel as if you've been down a pit shoveling coal. You know, it's that draining. And you think, I must have only spent 10 calories. All I've done is sat at a computer for 8 hours and moved my fingers, right? My fingers and my head have moved. That's it. Nothing else. And yet I'm physically drained. And it's just the emotion, just pure emotion.
And it can be the same actually, narrating stuff that is emotionally hard, and because when you're narrating it, you've got to very much connect with it, but you also have to not quite, you know, you can't be completely in it because you just, you know, you break. And I have done it where you just kind of break down. You have to stop and go and start that, like saying it, and it's exhausting because you're connected, you know, and it must be even more so when you're writing it because you're really connecting with it, and you say it's all coming out, so it's exhausting. So.
And also because, you know, as I said, the way I write with it downloading, I don't necessarily know where it's going and all the little bits and bobs. So I get sometimes quite shocked by things that happen. And for example, in Jigsaw Girl, there's a bit where she goes into the school. She's been off for a while. And there's been a fire, which she thinks she started and burnt her house down, and the fireman died, and the dog died, and all this terrible stuff happened. And somebody stuck, I don't know if you know the song Firestarter, someone stuck the lyrics of the song up in her locker, and she's just distraught. You know, and even as I was writing it, I didn't know I was going to write that. You know, just kind of came out. So, you know, so that's quite interesting as well. But again, you know, I get all those emotions. You know, I'm living this character as I'm writing them. So yeah, so it's definitely draining.
Well, I have to say, on the subject of dogs, the most emotional bit, which is a bit ridiculous for me, in Split Decision, was the dog. And I was I think I sent you a message after I read it, and I was like, the dog. I was just like, yeah, we've been through all of this, like really traumatic. It's quite towards the end. We've been through all this very traumatic stuff, and it was the dog bit that I was like, oh, I'm done now. I'm done. I can't cope with anymore.
It's funny, isn't it? I mean, there's quite a few animals in my books. I did think at one point when I started off, maybe I'd be like Dean Koontz, because Dean Koontz has got a dog. He's obviously a big dog lover. He's got a dog in every single book. I don't think I've ever read a Dean Koontz book that doesn't have it. Maybe there is one, but I just haven't read it. And I did think, I wonder if I'm going to have an animal in every book. And I've had cats and dogs and goldfish and all sorts, you know, in various books, but there's not something in every book. However, with the Owners series, the Eons themselves they're not animals, but they're huge feathered creatures with human faces, and human heads, but no hair, so they're bald. And then they have feathers and, bird wings, proper wings, and bird-like legs and talons and things. So they're kind of like an animal in a way. And there is actually a dog in that one as well. There's a few dogs actually in that one. But yeah, so the animals feature quite large in most of my books and some of the films.
Well, we're coming to the end now. I'll try and keep these to about, and we have got, funny enough, a little bit that does involve the dog in Split Decision, which I recorded earlier today. So once again, we've got a little sample for you to listen to of me narrating a bit of Split Decision for everyone to have a listen to. And if you haven't read the book, then do pick it up. You can obviously order it in paperback, and you can order it as an ebook as well. And you can find Carmen on her website and blog, which is...
So you can find me on Blogspot. If you basically Google my name, you'll find me somewhere.
You can come up, yeah.
Yeah, Facebook, Twitter, etc.
You can chat to her in the Wine and Words group. She's there as well.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your world with us. It's been absolutely brilliant. It was really nice to talk to you.
Thank you.
And I thoroughly enjoyed Split Decision. It was incredible. And I had started reading it again, but I had to move on because I was like, I'm going to go back and like read through the different bits and like compare it and go back. And so I will do that. So thank you so much. We are now going to listen to a little excerpt from Split Decision. And please do let us know in the comments. And actually, on that subject, that if you do read the book, it is really important for authors, independent authors and independent publishers. So if you do read the book, please do leave a review on Goodreads, Amazon, anywhere else you can. That would be great. So thanks very much, Carmen. I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
So I want to play you that a little bit of Split Decision. I'm just going to very quickly remind you that next week we are looking at a bit of true crime with The Watchmaker's Revenge by Adam Wood. So join me next week for that. In the meantime, here is a small piece of Split Decision by Carmen Capuano.
7:30 p.m. Whatever had hit the car, it had been big enough to cause damage. My mind raced while my gaze focused on the blood smeared on the shattered windscreen. Luckily, I'd fixed my seatbelt when I climbed in the front. Unluckily, Sean was similarly strapped in. But I'd still been slammed up hard against the dash, banging my head and making my nose bleed. There was pain in my shoulders and neck too, almost as much pain as there was in my abdomen and groin. I wondered if I'd broken a rib or a shoulder. I could move my head. That much I already knew because I'd turned it in the hope that Sean would no longer be in the car. Whether he'd be dead at the side of the road, having passed through the shattered but still fitted windscreen, or out of the car examining what he had hit, I really didn't care. Although given the choice, the first would certainly have been preferable to the last. But he was still in the driver's seat, next to me, looking dazed but unhurt. "We hit something," he said stupidly, looking down at his lap. "Are you hurt?" he asked. It was a dumb question under the circumstances. I'd been hurt even before the accident, and a lot of that was his doing. But I realised the question was more automatic than anything else, a reaction to the shock of impact. "A little, I think, but not much," I responded, wondering how this new turn of events would affect things. Would it have been better to have implied that I was badly wounded, that I needed a doctor, a hospital? Or would that have panicked him more? "Are you all right?" He nodded, and my heart fell. After all the lectures we'd had in school about safety when driving, and here he was, fueled by alcohol, drugged up and yet still fine after an accident, there was truly no justice in the world. "What did we hit?" I asked, hoping he would feel inclined to investigate. He shrugged his shoulders. "Don't actually know if we hit it or it hit us. But something happened. Yeah, something had happened. Somewhere out there beyond the confines of this car, someone lay bleeding or dead. There were no other cars around, and there had been no noise that I could remember, nothing to indicate that another car had been involved. We were surrounded by fields on a straight road that held no bends another car could suddenly have appeared from. Was it someone on a bike? I asked as if he knew, trying to remember if I'd noticed anyone. He shrugged once more. You go and see, I suggested, hoping that he would get out of the car but leave the keys in the ignition. He nodded, surprising me by taking my suggestion as an order. He opened his door and swung one leg out, leaving the keys untouched. My heart hammered so loudly I feared he would hear it. I tried not to think about my plan. I could move across, start the engine and drive off, except for two things my brain unhelpfully supplied. The first was that I didn't know how to drive. But if numbskulls like Sean could drive, whether legally or not, how hard could it be? The other thought was more gruesome. If whoever we'd hit now lay on the road in front of the car, I would have to drive over them to get away. If they were alive, I would effectively be killing them. If they were already dead, I would be desecrating their body. Even if I knew how to reverse, the problem would not be solved. The injured person could just as easily be at the back of the car as at the front. While these considerations ate at my conscience, survival instinct battling moral dilemma, Sean removed the quandary for me by reaching over and snatching the keys at the very last moment. Now my only hope of getting away was to follow him out of the car. I climbed out of my side and resisted the urge to immediately run away. The best thing to do was to assess the situation. Perhaps if someone were injured, Sean could be convinced to take them to a hospital, and I could make my escape there. I walked around the front of the car. A body lay there, perfectly still and completely impassive. My spit turned to a foul paste in my mouth and my stomach heaved. There was a thin, coppery smell to the air, which combined with the stench of burned rubber to make me feel light-headed and queasy. I bent down towards the body. Light brown hair flecked with its own blood, its fur matted and filthy. It was not a person at all. It was a painfully thin, unkempt dog, a stray that had seen only misery and misfortune in its life, and that had now had the saddest demise ever. "Is it dead?" I asked, bending down, full of pity for the poor creature whose fate had become so entwined with my own, the lost and broken empathising with the equally lost and broken. I felt a kindredship with a dog that was in direct contrast to how I felt about the human next to me. To my horror, he booted the poor thing as it lay there, injured and defenceless. It gave out a thin yelp, but did nothing to shield itself. And in that moment, I hated him so completely I would have buried a knife in his belly if I'd had one to hand. I would have twisted it cruelly and with malicious intent have withdrawn it, only so that I could reinsert it deeper into him. "If it's not dead yet, it soon will be. Fucking thing nearly scared the life out of me," he said angrily, without the slightest shred of compassion. He pulled his leg backwards as if preparing to strike it once more. I hauled my agonising body upwards, ignoring the pain, focusing on his leg and putting myself between him and the dog. For a moment he seemed inclined to move around and pass me to the creature, or alternatively just to kick me instead. I held his gaze, challenging him without words. He dropped his eyes from mine and backed off slightly. "You think it's hurt that badly?" I asked, managing to keep my voice even, my compassion hidden. He was probably right, I told myself. The fact that it still hadn't moved probably proved that. "Well, if it isn't yet, it will be by the time I drive over its sorry carcass." There was a not-quite laugh in his voice. The word sorry, often used to invoke pity, was used for an altogether different purpose. I couldn't let him kill the dog. If I stood by and let that happen, I would deserve every bad thing that had happened to me. To save myself, I had to first save the dog. I thought fast. "They'll go mad if they hear you've left more evidence. If you run over this dog, there'll be all sorts of tyre tracks and things." I wasn't sure of my facts, but figured that his fear was my only one weapon. Perhaps it didn't matter that the car was stolen, and that he had been ordered to burn it out. If he did what he said, he would be leaving evidence on the road, and he knew it. "It's only a dog, for fuck's sake," he said, annoyed at my logic, but unable to entirely dismiss it. "Exactly. I worked more logic on him. "It's only a dog, so just let it be. We can move it to the bushes at the side of the road there." I pointed a little way off, where at least the dog would be safe from other cars. "Probably no one will ever find it, and then we can park somewhere and get on with what we planned." My stomach recoiled at the thought of him laying his hands on me. "Okay," he said reluctantly, grabbing the creature's back legs and leaving me with its head and upper body. Placing my hands under the dog's coat, I could feel the papery skin covering its bones and how it shook in fear and shock at our touch. I tried to be extra gentle to compensate for Sean's roughness, but I saw the pain reflected in its eyes as it looked up at me pitifully. A thin whine issued from it wheezily. For a moment I thought it had breathed its last as its cheeks puffed up and down and then became still. But its breathing must have regulated because it blinked suddenly. "Stay alive," I thought at it, hoping that what they said about dogs being intuitive was true. Tenderly, I placed the dog's head and upper body on the ground under the bush. Sean tried to throw it down, but as I was supporting most of its weight, he didn't achieve the impact he'd hoped for. It was trembling, lungs now bellowing laboriously, and I worried that the cold air would worsen its condition. I had no clothing to cover it with and nothing soft to lay under it. If only Sean would agree to put the bed linen around it, but I knew without even asking that he wouldn't. "I'm coming back for you. I promise." I made the silent vow to the dog, running my hand softly over its head, feeling its fear and distress and pain magnifying my own perilous situation, amplifying the desperation I felt. "Leave it. Let's go," said Sean, straightening up. I pulled myself slowly upright. Terrible pain and fear made acting unnecessary in an attempt to look as if I truly could move at no quicker speed. But as he took his first few steps away from me and the dog, I plunged through the bramble of the bush and into the open field beyond. And I ran, pain streaking through me like a hot flame. I ran.